Hi, welcome to the first ever Latinx Kid Lit Book Festival. I'm Ann Davila Cardinal, and I'm very excited to be here. I want to remind you to please read our anti-harassment policy in the chat box before we begin. A little about me. I'm a novelist and director of student recruitment for Vermont College of Fine Arts. My novel 5 Midnights and the sequel Category 5 are published by Tortine. I live in Vermont with my husband Doug and son Carlos, and I like to spend my free time cycling, doing fiber arts, and preparing for the zombie apocalypse. That was fun. I've never read my bio before. I want to introduce you to our illustrious panel, fabulous writers. First, William, I'm doing it in alphabetical order because they all rock. First, we have William Alexander, who writes unrealisms for middle grade audiences. His novels include Goblin Secrets, Ambassador, and A Properly Unhaunted Place. Honors include the National Book Award, the Eleanor Cameron Award, and the Earphones Award for audiobook narration. Will studied theater and folklore at Oberlin College, English at the University of Vermont, and creative writing at the Clarion Workshop. He currently serves as the faculty chair of the VCFA program for writing for children and young adults. Welcome, William. Lily Anderson is the author of Undead Girl Gang, Not Now, Not Ever, and The Only Thing Worse Than Me Is You. A former school librarian, she now lives full-time in Northern California. Welcome, Lily. Sara Faring. Born in Los Angeles, Sara is a multilingual Argentine-American fascinated by literary puzzles. After working in investment banking at JP Morgan, she worked at Penguin Random House. She currently resides in New York City. Her latest novel, White Fox, was released by Macmillan Imprint in September 2020. Her debut novel, The 10th Girl, was released by Macmillan Imprint in 2019. And last but not least, Cynthia Palayo is the author of Loteria, Santa Muerte, The Missing, Poems of My Night, and the upcoming Children of Chicago by Agora Polis Books. She has an MFA and is a PhD candidate. She lives in Chicago with her family. Welcome, all of you. I'm so excited that you're here and we're talking for the Qué Horror panel on Latinx horror. Yay!
Thank you so much, Anne.
Thank you. I'm so excited. So I wanted to ask you each to tell us a little about your latest book.
Same order?
Let's start with Will. Yes.
Okay, I will go first. So my latest two books are A Properly Unhaunted Place and A Festival of Ghosts. And they are swashbuckling ghost stories set in a small town with a very strange relationship to both hauntings and history. And my protagonist, Rosa Diaz, who is not named after the Brooklyn Nine-Nine character, but she probably wouldn't mind if she were, is the daughter of a ghost appeasement specialist librarian, because libraries have long memories. So, of course, they're very haunted places, or at least they really should be. And in the first book, all of the ghosts in that town are mysteriously missing. So Rosa sets out to discover where they went.
Fabulous. Lily, what about you?
My most recent book is Undead Girl Gang, which is the story of a teen Wiccan whose name is Mila Flores. And when her best friend dies under mysterious circumstances, she sets out to solve the presumed murder by bringing her friend Riley back from the dead, and accidentally brings back two other girls who died the same week, who happen to be the former meanest girls in school, and together the group of them solve the murders that are happening in town.
Fabulous. Sara Faring, what about you?
Hello. Hi, everyone. I'm Sara Faring. My latest book, White Fox, came out just this September 2020, and it opens on a mysterious Mediterranean island where a world-famous film star lives with her pharmaceutical tycoon husband and their two young daughters. And one night, the film star disappears, and it's rumored she's left behind a final film script that could be the key to finding her. So 10 years later, her daughters, who now live in Manhattan and are basically estranged, they return to the island of their birth for a retrospective honoring their mother's work. And that's when they discover the film script, and it launches the most thrilling journey of their lives as they unravel really dark family secrets.
Fabulous. Sina, what about you?
So my book hasn't come out yet. It comes out February, and this is the cover, Children of Chicago. But it is based, it is a modern retelling of the Pied Piper fairy tale set in modern day Chicago. It is a horror thriller suspense novel that follows a detective along as she is trying to solve a murder in the city as other teens start being mysteriously murdered. So it's a little scary. It's 15 and up. But yes, if you like fairy tales, grim fairy tales, it's packed with all things Chicago history and Grimm's fairy tales.
Fabulous. And my latest novel is Category 5. It's a sequel to Five Midnights. And it takes place on the island of Vieques off the mainland of Puerto Rico. And there, people are turning up missing their hearts. And there have been some supernatural doings on the island. And it takes place after the summer after Hurricane Maria. And so it deals a lot with the island's recovery from that tragedy. So that's us. So now I'm going to start off with some questions that we came up with for the panel. And then afterwards, we're going to go to some student questions. So the first question I want to ask you all is, how does being Latinx inform your work when you write horror? Let's start with you, Will.
Unmute. Well, I find it normal to think of anywhere and everywhere as haunted. And I have noticed that if you're accustomed to moving between worlds made out of language, out of culture, out of foundational myths that you only share with some of the people you see every day, then every day feels like moving through magic portals or bouncing between dimensions. So I find that fantasy and horror and science fiction are all pretty good ways to navigate overlapping worlds in conflict with each other. And plus, it really doesn't hurt to have been raised Catholic. I mean, the whole aesthetic, the rituals, the imagery of tortured saints everywhere, the constant feeling that this is where the climax of a vampire movie really should happen. That stuff sinks in.
I love it. Lily, what about you?
For me, I think that the constant othering of existing in a predominantly white cis-het society really gives me, and probably all of us, this perspective of constantly looking and going, well, that's not right. And everyone else is saying that it is. It feels kind of step 40 sometimes to walk through white society. And especially if you're someone who passes as white, to have people talk to you in a way that you go, ooh, that's horrific. And to start unpacking and digging up the bones of what our society is built on and showcasing, oh, it's horror. It is just different to be different here.
I love the digging up the bones. That's a great image. Sarah, what about you?
Well, I couldn't agree more with the first two panelists who replied so eloquently, but I wanted to also give another little example, which is I think that such a big part of my Latinx identity is sort of interwoven with food traditions and sort of just a lot of warmth in my family and a really strong connection and sort of interdependence. And I don't want to make it seem unhealthy or toxic, but it's just something that I didn't see in other families around me when I grew up in Los Angeles. And so because of that, I think that there's always going to be sort of these complex family dynamics and a lot of, I don't want to lean on food, but like food in my work. And I think that when you remove those from someone's life when they're young, when you remove the love, the warmth, and all of these points of connection, the consequences can be pretty horrific. So I kind of like to explore that when there's a loss of that point of connection with your culture and with your family. And yeah. And of course, yeah, the landscape of my imagination is populated by these myths and legends that my Argentine grandmother told me growing up. And it feels like a very different flavor of horror than what I saw growing up on bookshelves in Southern California. Let's put it that way. So.
Yeah, that's particularly poignant right now, I think, Sarah, given, you know, how our holidays are adapting, having just come out of Thanksgiving and it's such a food-based holiday, and then we're coming into Christmas, and it's sort of like, where does the identity then lie if you don't have the food and the togetherness and the family? So it's a very, very
that's a great point. I mean, right now I'm having like my tilo and my dulce de leche everything because I'm not able to see a bunch of folks who I would normally see. And I know it feels a little bit cliched sometimes to talk about food in Latinx culture, but for me, it's especially when you're the child of an immigrant and you don't necessarily get to spend as much time with your extended family and you feel like such an other where you live, food can be such a quick and immediate sort of sensual experience, and it connects you with that. So I guess it's a cliche for a reason.
It's definitely grounding, definitely. Sina, what about you?
Just to echo and emphasize what everyone else has said, but definitely growing up Catholicism is the idea of ritual and the idea that objects can be imbued with like power and magic and mystery. Food, family, of course, the othering. I think those are things that we can all identify with. And additionally, I grew up with ghost stories. My parents were always telling me, this happened here growing up, and your grandfather told me about this story. And I think this oral tradition of passing down, I mean, our gossip, but as well, but, you know, just being told these fantastical stories by my parents of like ghosts in Puerto Rico and ghosts in the mountains, and, you know, being told of things that they've seen or things that they've heard. And so it was a lot of magic and mystery growing up. So this idea of like oral tradition, these stories that were told to us, that were told to our parents by their grandparents, and how these things have come down the line. So those things have featured really prominently in my work, this idea of ghost stories and magic and mystery and myth. So
I'm going to spend the whole panel just nodding like this because I identify so much with what you all are saying. For me, it's definitely, you know, Will and I have had long discussions about the fact that in the cultures we were brought up in, ghosts, the supernatural, there's not really a question, you know, ghosts exist. And for me, I'm particularly interested in the myths. And that's why I explored El Cuco in the first book, because the idea that he is in every culture and that he's what parents threaten their children with fascinated me. And I just feel like that's what makes these particular cultures so rich, is that mythology. So that's definitely something I explore. And I like to look at, you know, parents say, you know, you better behave or El Cuco's going to get you. Well, the first book answers the questions, well, what if he did? What if he came? And I find that, you know, that's what drives my work. So our second question, we have Cuba, Puerto Rico, and Argentina represented here today, heritage-wise. Cultures all too familiar with diaspora. Is this a theme you see bleeding through into your work, particularly when writing horror? Will, let's start with you.
All right. Yes, very much yes. A strong sense of exile is very much in my family and in every story that we tell. And also bouncing off of Sina's point about not just the way ghosts were a part of the stories I grew up on, but the way that they are absent everywhere else is that, especially, I mean, ghost stories, monster movies in the United States, the story is not over until the ghost is gone. Like if it's a nice ghost, it finds peace and it's gone. And if it's a mean ghost, it is banished and exiled and exorcised and is gone. The story's not done until there are no ghosts anywhere. And that sense that you can unhaunt a place is, I don't know that there's anywhere else in the world that has that sense that you can completely cut yourself off from the history of a place, because a haunting whatever happened in a haunted house is still happening. That haunted sense that history isn't over is a huge part of the stories I grew up on. And also, I mean, exile. I know this is a little more fantasy than horror, but they're related. My dad totally thought of himself as Aragorn, just this, exiled Numenorian from a lost island who's forced to wander the mainland with hobbits. I mean, that was a big part of how he presented the fantastical nature of exile to me, such that I was really surprised as a little kid, but still, to learn that Cuba is still there. I mean, Havana is a place, and people live there, like right now, and that was surprising, given that, as far as I could tell from my family stories, it was basically Atlantis, and therefore permanently gone. And okay, but back to horror. The key part of both fantasy and horror for me is that feeling of the loss of the familiar and figuring out how to navigate that. I mean, that feeling when, you get up to use the bathroom at 2 a.m. and everything is the same, but nothing is familiar. And just being able to navigate that, and you take that feeling and you just blow it up to the size of a continent. Is this home or not? And that feeling is something that I try to draw from when I write.
I love it. Fabulous. Lily, what about you?
For me, the feeling of diaspora is constantly asking, is this me or is this us? Being removed from so many people in my culture outside of my family, it's always been looking for other Puerto Ricans and then going, how are we similar? How are we different? And I feel like in horror, that is the feeling of, am I imagining this or are we imagining this? And there's also, building on what Will said about ghosts, I feel like in most Latinx cultures, magic is real. You just don't question it. There's something, even if it's bad magic is out there. And so looking at things and going, well, we know that there's more, in heaven and earth, Horatio, but constantly trying to examine what is and what isn't, and through the lens of your culture, your family, and then meeting new people and going, wait, do you see this too? Do you believe this? And the joy when you do find that, and the horror when you don't, when you assume, oh, everyone knows this, and then you're told no one else knows this. That for me is like the crux of the horror genre of, you're alone. You are the only person who knows this to be true.
Wow, I love that. It's like you guys are talking about my life. I love this. What about you, Sarah?
Yeah, I just got chills hearing you say that, Lily. I think that this will probably resonate with a bunch of you, but ever since I was a kid, I had a sense that I didn't fit in seamlessly into American society. And it was interesting growing up and seeing the ways my parents did bend to fit in and the ways they refused to do so, and then having to make those decisions myself. And I think part of growing up is trying on different identities and seeing which one feels most like yourself, for lack of a better way to express that. And for immigrants and children of immigrants, this process feels even more stark. And this is something I really love exploring in my books, because I think that when you're going through the process of figuring out who you are, you can feel untethered from yourself and from reality in really eerie and unsettling ways. And I think that horror does a really good job of pushing us to look at dark, hidden, unexplored nooks in ourselves, and, as some of you mentioned before, in society in general. So I think that's sort of where the connection lies for me. Kind of going back to that haunted house idea too. I've always thought about ourselves as haunted houses, and we have these rooms that are on, full display, and there's bright light shining through the window, and the blinds are open, and we're like, look at this room, everyone walking by. And then there are the hidden closets in the back and the hidden rooms that we don't even really know about, that sometimes we have the nerve to peek into or not. And yeah, I feel like that's that's something I've always thought about, because I felt like I had to, when I was young, sometimes I felt like I had to hide pieces of my identity or sort of lean into pieces of my identity when I was around certain kinds of people, which is very, yeah, for lack of a better word, unsettling and eerie, just like horror.
Okay, that's fabulous. The code switching, such an important part of this. Oh, I love it. Cinna, what about you?
One thing I was thinking about as everyone was talking was that I feel like I have had the ability to walk between worlds, and that in itself is very eerie. And so there's this conscious choice of adapting or choosing to adapt and picking and choosing what works for you. And because of that, I feel like we are able to enter a certain world and become something or not become something. And that in and of itself, it almost feels like you're a ghost. Like you can kind of swoop into these different environments and choose to kind of sit back and observe the room or choose to adapt to the room. And so I think that's very supernatural in a way. And so maybe that's why we all have this I think we all have these really strange supernatural superpowers because of that. And so while I have personally felt saddened and confused by it, and there's nothing more stark than 1 minute I'm in Chicago in this English speaking world in this huge city, and within a few hours I can be from the plane to my small town in Puerto Rico up in the mountains. And that switch within a day, it's really shocking and it's very surreal in a sense. But being able to experience that and then smoothly adapt, I feel like it's been a superpower in a way. It's a sad superpower, but I think it's also beautiful because you can be, in a moment, be immersed in this language and this food and this culture, and then in another moment in another one. So
That's fabulous. I definitely identify with, I mean, the privilege of being able to navigate the two worlds. And for me, how this, I mean, Puerto Rico is still a colony. And so, and it has been for, when, you know, my mother was born in 24, it was already, you know, had been a colony before that. So the theme of anti-colonialism seems to come through in everything I write, and anti-colonialism is horror, you know? And I mean, I write a picture book and it comes through. I don't intend to have it there and it comes through. So that's how it tends to manifest for me. And also I'm drawn, I mean, the two books that I have that are out now are based on the island because it just seems like a fertile place for that. And for my stories, I'm much more inspired by life on the island. So, well, we have our final question. This festival, this panel is about writing for young people. Why do kids need horror? Will, you want to start us?
Sure. Because, and this word has weight right now. It has particular weight. I think horror is a vaccine. It's a manageable dose of the horrific, and so it stretches mental muscles that we really need to stretch before we get too much older, because adults generally expect the world to make sense, and kids know better, and kids are a lot better at moving through a world that does not make sense, of worlds plural that contradict each other, that have cracks in the foundations. And the average 11-year-old is therefore much, much better at navigating through circumstances that should not be happening than someone 3-4 times their age. So to take that vaccine and to sort out that kind of story safely and vicariously through a book develops a skill set that is really important, and that is good to work on then, good to remember later.
I was an elementary school librarian for about 12 years, and without fail, every group of kids I worked with, no matter what town it was, around second grade, kids start saying, I want a scary book. And I think that's the point when parents tend to shield their kids from what is unpleasant. And the more in the world kids are, the more that they see, the more that they're in their own little community of school, they realize that there's so much more out there, and there's so many other things they could be feeling and reading about, and it just lights up their brain, and they just get so hungry for the things that have been hidden from them. And for me, writing horror is such a safe way to process grief. And I love being able to share that in a way that, I mean, we're pretty deep into this panel. I am such a scaredy cat. I have such a hard time reading horror, and I do it, but every time I'm just like, oh, it's so scary. Oh, I gotta look away. I watch scary movies through my fingers. But it's important to feel all of your feelings, even the ones you want to look away from. And I think kids get that so quickly of, why aren't you letting me look at this? I want to look at it straight in the face. And it's like, okay, here you go. And we have to give them what they want and what they need. Just like Will said, like that vaccine of the unpleasant, because it's out there and they know it.
I love that. And I have to say, Lily, I'm also a scaredy cat. I mean, I think people are like, I don't read horror because I'm frightened. And I'm like, well, I'm frightened too. That's why I write it, because it makes the horror that the fears that you have every day seem, well, at least there aren't zombies knocking on the door, So I totally agree with you. Sarah, what about you? Why do you think kids need horror?
First of all, another scaredy cat here. I don't love admitting that in settings like these, but I have to be honest. And I wasn't planning on sharing this, but you got me thinking about the fact that when I was a kid, I actually was one of those scary book horror junkies that Lily was kind of talking about. And I think for me, so I grew up obviously in Southern California, said that a few times, and I was surrounded by people who, I guess at school, it was not necessarily encouraged to show your feelings. And you were kind of encouraged to kind of like, I don't want to say keep a stiff upper lip because this wasn't the UK, but to some degree, you couldn't show your emotions. And then I would go home and I would see displays of anger and displays of sadness. And it felt like swinging back and forth. Like, what am I supposed to do as a kid with these feelings inside me? Show them, not show them, where, when? So for books, it was a safe place to be like, okay, this is private. I'm alone. I'm exposing myself to something that's truly disturbing or scary or sad or full of heart, love, whatever. And I can just like, if I want to cry, I can cry. If I want to like rage and shake and read it, I can. And I'm sort of being guided through this emotional arc in this book, and kind of given a template for how to feel and how to move through difficult feelings. So not to just cover them up and pretend they don't exist, and not to just like, rage and explode and then disappear and not see the, kind of simmering down bit. So I think that horror is crucial in that way. And also for the reasons that you said, that I think that it really encourages us to look at the dark nooks in ourselves a little bit more. And it provides a framework for us to kind of think about all of the horrific things that happen in the world and kind of shape them into a story that we can process, and not just be completely overwhelmed by. So yeah, that's more or less how I view it. And rant. No.
I totally agree. Totally agree. What about you, Sina?
I will admit I watch a lot of horror. I am the horror junkie. I watch a lot of horror movies. I read a lot of horror. I've been obsessed with horror since I was a little kid, watching The Twilight Zone with my dad and watching Alfred Hitchcock Presents when my mom was like, what are you two watching? And watching Psycho. And my mother was completely terrified and thought my dad and I were insane. But I grew up watching a lot of horror, and I think how it's helped me is how I hope it would help other children. And to me, I think of horror teaches you how to defeat the monster. And then horror also teaches you that you can defeat the monster. And the monster can be anything from the pile of homework that you have, from your sibling that's being mean to you. And I feel like it teaches you, at least, that these challenges can be overcome, and that there are a lot of situations in our lives that are overwhelming, that have a lot of anxiety, that have a lot of unknowns, and that horror is a great way to help follow a character along as they're experiencing all of that frustration and all of that anxiety and all those scary moments and uncertainties that we've dealt with as children, and we've dealt with in navigating two different identities and two different worlds. And it teaches you what is possible. And so, and it also teaches you that you can rise above these situations, these scary situations, and it's okay to be scared. It really is okay to be scared. And it's okay because I feel like it will teach you how to be brave. So, just some thoughts.
I so agree with that. And I too have been obsessed with horror. I grew up with 3 older brothers, Dracula, my mother was always reading Gothic literature. But I became obsessed with it when sort of the aspects of my life became overwhelming. My father passed away when I was 8 of ALS. My mother was an alcoholic. And I think, like Sina said, first of all, like Lily said, it was a way of dealing with grief and loss. And then, like Sina said, it was a way to see that it can be overcome. I remember in Puerto Rico, I'd have a pile of horror comics, and my tia would say, "Ay, Annie, that's so horrible. Why don't you read something nice?" And she just didn't understand. And she was like, "Does your mother know you're reading this?" And I said, "Who do you think bought them for me?" But it helped me in processing. And so now I love it too. I am still scared, but I like being scared. So, and so now I think we have a few seconds until we're going to questions from the students. And I just had a quick one for you, Will, particularly because you navigate the world of YA and middle grade. How does middle grade horror differ from YA, do you think?
Ooh.
Oh, I couldn't have threw that one at you, so.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I also wanted to say, just bouncing off of what Sarah said, that Anne, you and I are constantly talking about what it's like to be from the Caribbean in New England in terms of, however we feel about something is usually visible from space. And that's not true of most of the people around us most of the time. So, that's fun. And I'm stalling for time. Okay. Difference between middle grade and YA. Yeah, this is something I think about a lot. I think I would write middle grade because there's something about the age of 11. I've never needed books more than I did then. And it is such an important time. In so many ways we're fully formed. 11 years old, we're as sophisticated as we're ever going to be. And we're not quite hormone scrambled yet. So there's this moment of clarity right before everything changes. And I think one of the big reasons that somehow vampires and werewolves still haven't gone out of style is they're such good puberty metaphors. You're about to turn into something else, possibly something very hairy. With uncontrollable appetite. So, good luck with that. And just that feeling of being middle grade right before being YA, and that sense of transformation and not knowing how to navigate that is terrifying and deeply weird. And so I think of the difference between one of the big differences between middle grade and YA is either being before that moment, either blissfully unaware of it or just staring over the edge of that abyss. And then YA is after you start falling into that particular abyss.
I love it. And Lily, you were a elementary school librarian. Does this track for you?
Oh, definitely. 11, like 5th grade, 5th, 6th grade, depending on where you go to junior high. That is the veil between childhood and adulthood. That really is like they are staring at through the window into adulthood. Like, is that what it's gonna be like? And they need horror. They need to be told it doesn't have to be, but it's probably gonna be that bad. Yes, it is 100%. I could not agree more. They really do need so much information just poured into them at that point because they're going to forget it when the second they turn 13.
I love this. I love this. Okay, we're gonna move to student questions so we can cover those. Okay. We have a question from Daniela. She's in the 8th grade from South Carolina.
So my first question is, what inspires you to be an author?
Will, you want to start us off again?
Sure. It was something I always figured I would do eventually, because I loved and needed books so much. But it's something I did absolutely nothing about to make it happen. For a long time, I kept doing, in school, especially in high school, in college, I kept studying theater instead of doing any creative writing stuff because it was great and it was fantastic and it was luckily a transferable skill set. And it's not that I thought I was going to grow up to be an actor. I still sort of thought, no, I want to be a novelist. But with theater, I've got instant gratification. I mean, I loved all the people I was working on theater with, and that, you tell a joke on stage and people laugh immediately, and you type a joke into your book in the basement and there's silence, possibly for years. So I like, it took me a long time to realize, like, time is finite. I should actually do the thing that I have always suspected that I would someday do.
And we're so glad you did. We're so glad. And Lily, what about you? What inspires you?
Definitely books. Books were my biggest inspiration for writing more books. I've been bookish from the jump. I learned to read when I was 3, never set a book down. I was the kid who read books at holidays and read books at the dinner table. And I started writing books when I realized that people don't act like book characters. Everyone says the wrong thing. You set it up like, I'm going to say this, and then they're going to say whatever they want to. They have free will. And I was like, nope, I got to go home and write that scene how I needed it to go. And so it's very much, the bookish world will help you process feelings, but it will not help you predict how other people are going to react. And I wanted to be able to predict how people were going to react.
That's fascinating. I love it. Sarah, what about you?
So mine's kind of a warped take on what Lily said, but my answer is two-pronged. I was a really, really, really lonely kid who basically felt like an alien, like many of us do. Maybe not, but I think so. Anyway, I'm seeing the nods. So for me, obviously books were that refuge, and eventually that was video games. And one day I kind of thought, hey, what's interactive, but also lets me hang out with the written word? Okay, that sounded super nerdy. I could write my own books. I could create my own worlds and characters and people and be around people who I would love to get to know and be around one day. Yeah, I sound a bit unhinged, but it was brilliant. Never finished a book when I was a kid because I would lose enthusiasm and want to enter a new world and meet new people. But then when I was older, I kind of set books aside for a long time because I think there are schooling in a lot of ways, but also many careers, I don't want to say discourage you from reading, but they just don't leave a lot of free time to kind of get into the headspace you need to get into, sit down with a book and actually process the words on a page. It's so much easier to just watch TV to unwind. And I realized that I was really missing books. I feel like to get on that wavelength with where an author's taking you and move through a narrative in that way, it's almost meditative. And I really needed it. And so I started reading just in little, whatever I could grab, little bits of time, more and more. And I decided to leave my job in finance, and I got a job at a publisher. And while I was at the publisher, I was such an excellent employee who on my free time was just reading everything. And then I started to write again. And that's how I became an author.
What about you?
For me, it was, I always wanted to be a writer. I have like a really vivid memory of being in second grade and my teacher asking me what I wanted to be. And I said, I want to be an artist. And so I was actually a freelance journalist for a long time in Chicago. And writing stories has just been a way for me to process just this weird world and weird identity that I felt that I was growing up. And it also goes back to my love of monsters. I felt like writing about monsters was the best way for me to be able to communicate what it was I was feeling. And so it all started off with me wanting to express my world, or something I always wanted to do, and me wanting to express my world. And so I hope that is helpful.
That's great. That's great. Thank you. For me, I've obviously always read voraciously since I could read 5. But what inspired me to write, I never thought I would do it, was my own son. And that the family stories that my mother told me about our family in Puerto Rico, particularly, and I was afraid they were all going to die. And I realized that a little late, because I'm kids, listen when your grandma's talking, when abuelita's talking, write something down. Because I wish I could get those all, and that those people were still alive, and I could gather more and more and more, because now I'm hungry for it. But that's why I started writing. And then I found out that I love making things up. My brothers would tell you that I always have. But okay, and we have our next question from Eloy V, who's in the 8th grade also, from South Carolina. And this is for Will Alexander.
My question is for William Alexander, and I want to ask him, how many times did you take to write one book?
My first book took 9 years. My next book took 9 months, because I had a deadline the second time. And so then I learned outlining, and that turned out to be useful. So it took a really long time to finish my first book, and I didn't. I wrote many endings to that book, and none of them were right. And then I just wrote on the wall of my office right above the computer, finish the story you started. And then that was when the 9 years finally came to a close. But it is possible to be faster.
Yeah, I'm a recovering pantser. I've learned the magic of plotting for the same reason, because I could just sort of ramble on and then not have a story. Okay, our third student question is for Sara Faring. How do you choose the title of your book that you think will be the most meaningful to the story? This is from Lily T in the 7th grade from Maine.
Lily, I love this question. Thank you. I also feel slightly called out, and I'll explain why. I am horrifically bad at choosing titles for my books. I don't know what it is, but whenever I would pick them at first, I would choose the setting. And it would be the name of the haunted house in the book, because going back to what I said about haunted houses, for me, exploring a haunted house is like exploring, the protagonist's psyche. But I have since learned, by being kind of corralled and encouraged by agent and editor, to figure out what makes a good title. And I think for me, I like the title to be many things. I like it to be, first off, a phrase that captures a person's imagination. I love it to be a wink at a careful reader. So when you're done, you say, oh, I understand that now. And I like it to be a key to unlocking a hidden layer of the story. So my latest book is called White Fox. And that's also the name of the fairy tale-like script inside the book, which my basically a mother writes so that her daughters will understand her. And after she disappears, this takes on obviously a really intense new meaning. And so for me, it was a reflection of this idea that throughout the book, the protagonists are trying to wade through and explore these different narratives that they hear about their mother, to kind of identify which one makes sense for them, which one feels right to them based on the little knowledge they have of her. So for me, I loved kind of being able to hint at all of those layers right smack dab in the title, and make it punchy too. So Lily, thank you.
Fabulous. We have a few more minutes. I would just love to hear a very short synopsis on what you're working on right now or what's next. Will, we're gonna just keep with the pattern.
Must we? Okay. I am hanging out in a floating castle in the sky that I'm trying to figure out what's happening there. And mostly it is a story that is now based very solidly in Cuban folklore, but the initial spark of it was a lot more Doctor Who. And it just bothered me that that time travel has to always be space travel. I mean, because the planet's, moving around the sun. So if you go back 6 months, the Earth is really far away if you just stay in one place and go back. So all of these stories about floating castles in the clouds, I thought, okay, what if there's a place on Earth that just gets fixed in time and space, which means it stays right there and the Earth keeps orbiting. And then it comes back around once a year. And then much later, it became a deep dive into Caribbean history and folklore, and not as much a Doctor Who story. But that's how it started. Yep.
You had a floating castle in the sky.
Good.
I'm Lily, what are you working on?
My next book is called Scout's Honor. It'll be out from Henry Holt in, I think, April of 2022. It's about a Puerto Rican girl whose family are all part of the Ladybird Scouts, who look like the DAR, sort of a fancy ladies society, but actually hunt invisible monsters that come from another dimension to feed on everyone's feelings. The heat of your feelings makes these monsters come in, and only these scouts can kill them and send them back to their dimension. And my main character left the scouts when her best friend died in the field, and 3 years later has to go back and confront her grief in the form of a horror novel.
I'm in. I'm so in. This is so exciting. Sarah, what are you working on?
These sound so good. So I got really lucky. I have a story that's in a Macmillan Wednesday Books anthology coming out early 2022. It's called Reclaim the Stars. It's a Latinx science fiction fantasy anthology. And my story is set in 1910 Argentina, and it's a really eerie, weird, horrific take on the eerie, weird, and horrific, but very true story of my great-grandmother's poisoning by tomato. And there are weird creatures in it and all kinds of strange things. And I loved being able to kind of explore 1910 Argentina through my grandmother's stories about her, ancestors. Ancestors isn't fair, not that far back. But yeah, so I'm really excited about that.
I'm still stuck on poisoning by tomato.
I can't laugh because it's so bad, but it just sounds so absurd. And it makes me think of haunted pizza, and I guess I'm hungry. So
I love it. I love it. Sina, other than the PhD, which you're working on very hard, are you working on some creative work as well?
Yes. I just need my dissertation, and that'll happen whenever it happens. So I have two small children. I have a 7-year-old son and a 3-year-old son, and they're both on the autism spectrum, and they're high functioning autism spectrum. So my next novel that I'm working on right now is a middle grade horror novel, and the protagonist is based off of my son. So it's been, he keeps asking me every day, Mom, have you finished my book? I'm like, yeah, no pressure. He's like my little editor. So yeah, that's what I'm working on right now. So I'm in really early stages of that. So.
Oh, I should have tapped you for the middle grade question. I didn't realize you're working on it. That's great. I'm working on a secret project for HarperCollins. It is a horror rom-com. That's all I'm going to say. And it does have a Puerto Rican main protagonist. So, well, we're out of time. I'm so honored to have been here with y'all. Will, Lily, Sarah, Sin, Sina, you're just fabulous, and I so appreciate you. And thank you for attending the Qué Horror panel at the first ever Latinx Kidlit Book Festival.